The cold rain beat softly against the store's glass doors as a little girl stood shivering near the entrance, her toes pressed to the wet floor. Her socks were soaked through, dark with mud, clinging to her tiny feet where shoes should have been. She held a thin plastic bag that sagged heavily from one torn corner, as if life had worn it down the same way it had worn her. Her father knelt beside her with tired eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and endless worry. His hand hovered near her shoulder, trembling like he wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure he deserved to. A quiet apology hid behind his gaze, the kind of apology too big for words and too heavy for a child to understand. Just a few steps away, a woman stood frozen with a grocery basket resting against her hip. She had only come for fruit and bread, but the sight of the girl's bare, sock-covered feet made her heart drop. Her breath caught when she noticed a folded school notice sticking out of the worn plastic bag. The word required glaring in red bold letters. Before the story continues, please share your name or the country you're listening from today. Leave a comment so I can greet you personally next time. And remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy heartfelt stories like this one. The father lowered his head as if shrinking beneath the weight of circumstances he couldn't escape. His jacket was damp, torn at one cuff, and too thin for the weather, but he wrapped it around his daughter's shoulders anyway. The girl leaned quietly into him, not crying, not complaining, simply standing with a small patience learned too young. The woman's gaze softened with worry as she stepped closer, but she didn't speak yet. Instead, she observed the father's trembling hands and the way his fingers brushed the girl's hair with a careful tenderness. Something deep inside her shifted, the quiet sense that she had walked into a moment meant to change someone's life. A gust of cold air pushed through the door as another customer walked past, and the girl flinched from the chill. The father swallowed hard and stood, his shoulders sagging under invisible weight. He took a hesitant step toward the aisle, as if unsure whether he belonged in a place filled with warm lights and full shelves. The woman followed them slowly, each step careful, as though she feared startling the fragile scene unfolding ahead. Her eyes drifted again to the girl's wet socks, leaving faint footprints across the store floor. Footprints that spoke louder than any words could have. She tightened her grip on her basket, knowing she couldn't simply walk away. They paused near the school supplies aisle, where bright-colored notebooks and rows of children's shoes sat neatly on display. The father stared at the shoes with a look of quiet defeat, one that told a story without having to speak it. He reached out to touch a pair briefly, then pulled his hand back as if the price tag had burned him. The girl looked up at him with trust so pure it strained the heart, unaware of the battle happening inside his tired eyes. She tugged his sleeve with a soft, shy gesture, not asking for anything, just wanting to stay close. Her innocence made the moment even heavier, even more painful to witness. The woman stepped forward, drawn by something she couldn't ignore, her voice soft as she approached. The father turned slightly, startled, but he didn't hide the worry etched in his face or the exhaustion in his posture. The girl's small fingers held onto his coat as if it were the only steady thing in her world. This was the moment the woman would never forget, the moment her life brushed against theirs, and something inside her refused to step aside. The little girl lifted her gaze toward her, eyes bright but dimmed by the kind of sadness a child shouldn't carry. And in that gaze, the woman felt her heart shift in a way that demanded action. Their stories had only just collided, but what happened next would change them all. The woman hesitated only a moment before taking another soft step toward the father and child, her voice gentle as the space between them closed. The father straightened slightly, as though bracing himself for judgment he feared but could no longer avoid. Yet when he met the woman's eyes, he saw no criticism, their only concern. Warm and honest, something he hadn't been offered in a long time. The girl lowered her gaze shyly, clutching her plastic bag as if it contained treasures instead of worry. The soaked socks clung to her small feet, leaving faint wet marks on the shiny store tiles behind her. The woman noticed how tightly she held her toes together, trying to hide the discomfort, as though embarrassed by a problem she hadn't caused. "Is she cold?" the woman asked softly, offering her words with a kindness so fragile it almost broke the air around them. The father swallowed hard, nodding once, his tired voice unable to rise above a whisper. He gently brushed the girl's damp hair aside, trying to make her look presentable, though he knew appearances mattered little against truth. The woman's gaze drifted to the row of children's shoes nearby, perfectly arranged and brightly colored, each pair promising comfort and warmth. She watched as the father glanced at them again, his eyes lingering on a small pair of pink shoes that looked like they belonged to the girl. But the price tag glinted harshly under the fluorescent light, turning hope into distance. He turned away quickly, pulling his daughter close, as if shielding her from disappointment she hadn't voiced. The girl didn't tug toward the shoes or ask for anything at all, only rested her cheek against her father's hand with a quiet acceptance beyond her years. The woman felt a knot form in her throat, the kind that comes when witnessing love mixed with helplessness. "Do you need help?" she asked, her voice trembling with sincerity rather than pity. The father's shoulders stiffened, his pride flaring even as his reality weighed him down like stones tied to his chest. He opened his mouth to answer, but shame silenced him before any words emerged. The girl looked up at her father, then at the woman, reading emotions she didn't fully understand but could feel. Her eyes held a small hope she tried to hide, a hope that maybe today would be different from those before it. The father noticed that hope and felt his resolve crack under the gentle burden of her trust. The woman stepped closer, placing her basket gently on the floor so her hands would be free, her intentions clear. She didn't look at the father with charity, nor at the child with pity, but at both with a simple human compassion rarely given without strings. Her presence softened the harshness of the moment, turning fear into something lighter. The father exhaled shakily, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though holding back the weight of embarrassment. He wanted to protect his daughter from needing strangers, yet here he was, stuck between pride and reality. When he finally spoke, his voice carried every crack of a man trying his best in a world that often demanded more. "We're okay," he lied quietly, though the lie trembled in the air like a thread stretched to thin. The woman didn't challenge him or press him further, but her eyes lingered on the girl's wet socks and the worn plastic bag. Truth didn't need to be spoken, hung between them, undeniable and heavy. Just then, the girl whispered something faint, her small voice barely reaching beyond her father's arm. The woman leaned subtly closer, her heart tightening as she caught the words the child thought no one could hear. And in that soft, trembling whisper, the doorway to their unfolding story began to widen. "Daddy, I don't have shoes for school." The father closed his eyes for a moment as the little girl's quiet confession slipped into the air, fragile as a raindrop. Her words pressed against him like a weight he could no longer carry alone, breaking through the last layer of strength he'd tried so hard to hold. When he opened his eyes again, they glistened with a raw honesty he could no longer hide beneath pride or practiced silence. The woman watched him carefully, her heart tightening as she saw the shame flicker across his face. This wasn't a man who didn't care. This was a man who cared so deeply he had nearly broken himself trying to keep the world from seeing his struggle. She stepped closer, her voice gentle enough to ease the tremble in the girl's shoulders. "What's your name, sweetheart?" she asked softly, kneeling just enough to meet the child's eyes without towering over her. The girl hesitated, glancing up at her father for approval, as though even speaking her own name required permission. He gave her a small nod, his hand smoothing her damp hair with a tenderness that revealed everything he wished he could give. "My name is Lily," the girl whispered, her voice tiny and careful, like she feared taking up too much space. The woman smiled, the kind of smile that carries warmth even into the coldest corners. She could see strength hidden beneath the girl's shyness. It's a small light that had survived more than anyone her age should endure. "And I'm Ava," the woman replied, her own voice steady as she adjusted her posture. She reached out her hand, not demanding, not assuming, just offering presence in a moment that needed gentleness. Lily placed her small fingers in the woman's palm, and Ava felt how cold her hands had grown from standing so long in wet socks. The father shifted uncomfortably, torn between gratitude and fear of overstepping into dependence. His eyes flicked toward the exit as though searching for escape from the embarrassment hanging heavily over him. But when he looked back at Liliat, her soaked socks and quiet courage, the escape he had wanted a moment earlier now felt shameful and small. Ava noticed his struggle, understanding that pride can be both armor and prison. She stood slowly, giving him space, allowing him to breathe past the feeling of being watched for his weaknesses. She didn't rush him or force conversation. She simply waited with a patience he didn't expect from a stranger. Finally, he managed to speak, his voice low and cracked from holding too much inside. She outgrew her shoes last month, he admitted, each word sounding like it had been pulled from a deep wound. I've been trying to save up for new ones, but rent was due, and... His voice broke off as he swallowed hard. Ava's chest tightened as she listened, imagining the quiet battles he must have fought each day. She noticed the faint calluses on his hands, the worn cuffs on his jacket, and the exhaustion settling beneath his eyes, man stretched thin in every direction. Yet even with so little, he held his daughter as though she were the one thing he refused to let slip away. "It's okay," Ava said softly, placing a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. She kept her voice free of pity, replacing it with a simple recognition of their humanity. Needing help doesn't mean you're not doing your best. The father looked away, shame tugging at the edges of his expression. "I don't want her to think she's different," he whispered. "Kids notice things at school. The teacher sent a note home, said she needs proper shoes by Monday." Lily lowered her head, pressing her cheek against her father's arm, her voice barely above a breath. "I told Daddy I don't mind. I can wear my socks." The words pierced Ava's heart in a way she didn't expect. No child should have to learn sacrifice before learning how to tie their own shoes. She could not walk past this moment and pretend she hadn't seen it. Something in her refused to let it become another quiet heartbreak in the world. Ava turned toward the shoe section, her mind already racing with a decision she knew she couldn't ignore. She looked back at the father, meeting his eyes with a resolve that softened the panic flickering behind them. He seemed to sense her intention, his shoulders stiffening as he whispered a warning almost too late. "Please," he murmured, voice strained. "You don't have to." But Ava had already taken the first step toward the aisle, toward the rows of small shoes waiting under warm lights. And as she walked, she felt both the burden and blessing of knowing she was about to change their day in a way none of them had expected. Ava paused at the edge of the shoe aisle, letting her eyes sweep over the rows of neatly displayed children's sneakers. Bright colors, soft fabrics, tiny laces, each pair held a promise of comfort and dignity a child should never have to ask for. She exhaled slowly, steadying herself as she turned back toward Lily and her father, both standing uncertainly near the end of the aisle. The father watched Ava with conflicted eyes, torn between gratitude and the ache of feeling inadequate. His hands rested gently on Lily's shoulders as though shielding her from both judgment and hope. He looked like a man who had learned to expect the world to say no long before anyone ever said yes. Ava approached them with deliberate calm, wanting him to feel respected, not exposed. She crouched down to Lily's height again, offering a gentle smile that warmed the tired light in the girl's eyes. "Lily," she said softly, "would you like to pick a pair of shoes?" "Any pair you want." Lily blinked, stunned, as though she couldn't believe permission could sound so kind. Her small fingers curled into her father's coat, unsure whether she was supposed to answer. The father inhaled sharply, stepping forward as though trying to block the offer before it reached his daughter's heart. "Ava, please," he said quietly, his voice roughened by the humility of the situation. "I appreciate what you're trying to do. I do, but I can't let you. His words stumbled, lost somewhere between pride and pain. He lifted a hand toward the shoes, then let it fall uselessly to his side. Ava met his gaze with empathy, not intrusion, her voice steady as she responded. I'm not doing this because I think you can't provide, she said gently. I'm doing it because everyone needs a little help sometimes. And because she deserves warm feet on the way to school. Lily's eyes flicked up at her father, wide and hopeful in the unguarded way only a child could manage. The father saw the sparkle of longing and instantly faltered, his resolve softening around the edges. He rubbed his thumb along her shoulder, trying to swallow the knot in his throat. It's not your responsibility, he murmured, avoiding Ava's eyes. I don't want her growing up thinking strangers always have to step in. His voice carried a kind of exhaustion. Ava recognized the exhaustion of a parent who loved fiercely but carried burdens too big to share. Ava softened her tone further, careful not to push too hard. She won't grow up thinking that, she said. She'd grow up remembering that someone cared on a day she needed it. That's the kind of memory that teaches kindness, not dependence. Lily's small voice broke the tension as she whispered, Daddy, can I just look? The words were featherlight, but they landed like a plea she had been afraid to speak. The father closed his eyes for a moment, pain stretching the lines on his face. When he opened them again, the fight seemed to drain from his body, leaving only the love he held for the girl gripping his sleeve. He nodded once slowly, almost reluctantly, but it was a yes. Lily's breath caught as she hesitantly took a step toward the shelves. Ava smiled and stood, following close behind her but giving her space to explore. The girl walked softly, her wet socks making faint prints on the floor traces of hardships slowly leading toward hope. Ava watched her scan the shelves, her face lighting up at each bright color and soft fabric. It was the look of a child experiencing possibility, maybe for the first time in weeks. The father hovered in the background, torn between watching her joy and fearing it might crumble if the moment slipped away. Lily paused in front of a pair of pink shoes with white stars across the sides, her eyes lingering as she pressed her fingers against the box. Ava stepped closer but didn't speak, letting the girl decide at her own pace. Lily looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. Can I try them? She asked. Ava nodded with a warm smile. Of course. The girl sat on the small bench nearby, her wet socks leaving damp marks on the cushion. Ava knelt and gently removed the socks, wringing them lightly before setting them aside. She opened the box, lifting the new shoes with caress, though handling something precious. When she slipped the first shoe onto Lily's foot, the girl gasped softly, the warmth surprising her. The father watched, his expression cracking under the mix of relief and sorrow, grateful yet hurting that he hadn't been the one giving her comfort. The second shoe went on just as easily, and Lily stood, wiggling her toes inside the soft lining. She took a tentative step, then another, then looked up at her father with a smile so bright it seemed to light the aisle. They feel like clouds, she whispered. Ava felt her heart melt at the sight. And the father, oh. The father, his eyes shimmered with the tears he tried desperately to blink away. He pressed a trembling hand to his mouth, struggling to hold himself together in the middle of the store. In that small moment, something unspoken began to shift between the three of them, something fragile. Something hopeful, something beautifully human in a world that far too often forgot how to be kind. Lily walked a few more steps, her new shoes tapping softly against the polished floor. Each step carried a little more confidence, as if the warmth around her feet seeped slowly into her heart. She turned and spun once, a tiny laugh escaping her lips, delicate and full of wonder. Ava watched her with a smile that grew brighter with every movement Lily made. Seeing the girl so happy felt like watching a flower open after a long, cold season. The scene softened something deep inside her, reminding her why small acts of kindness mattered so much. The father stood frozen, one hand pressed against his mouth as emotion pooled heavily behind his eyes. He had held himself together for so long that letting go even slightly felt dangerous. Yet the sight of his daughter smiling, a real, unburdened smile, pulled a tear from him he could not hide. He quickly wiped his cheek, embarrassed by the slip, but Ava pretended not to notice. She knew that pride wasn't stubbornness. It was survival for someone who had walked too many hard roads. Instead of pointing it out, she gestured gently toward Lily, offering him a moment of comfort without words. Lily rushed back to her father, her tiny footsteps light and eager as she tugged at his jacket. "Daddy, look, they don't hurt at all," she said, her voice bright from a joy she hadn't felt in too long. The father knelt and held her face gently, as though memorizing her happiness. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he whispered, trying not to let his voice shake as he hugged her tightly. His heart ached with gratitude and a quiet ache of guilt he couldn't completely silence. Ava watched the embrace and felt her throat tighten with emotion she hadn't expected. When the hug ended, Lily looked at Ava with wide, hopeful eyes. "Do I have to take them off now?" she asked, lightly gripping the edges of the shoes as if afraid they might vanish. Ava chuckled softly and crouched down to meet her gaze. "No, sweetheart," she said warmly. "Those shoes are yours now." Lily's eyes glimmered as though she was hearing magic, not simple kindness. She stepped closer and wrapped her arms around Ava in a shy but genuine hug. Ava held her gently, surprised at how natural it felt to comfort a child she had met only minutes ago. The father watched the moment unfold, his hands hanging awkwardly at his sides as though unsure whether to step in or step back. Gratitude and discomfort tangled inside him like two threads pulled too tightly together. He cleared his throat and approached Ava slowly, his voice low and unsteady. I don't know how to thank you," he said, the sincerity in his tone making the words waver. "You don't know us, and you didn't have to do this." Ava shook her head and stood, brushing off the dust from her knees. "Sometimes you don't need to know someone to help them," she replied softly. "Sometimes you just see a moment where kindness fits, and you step in because you can." The father lowered his gaze, absorbing her words with a heaviness that seemed to settle into his shoulders. He had learned to expect rejection, not generosity, not from strangers, and certainly not without judgment. Ava's kindness caught him off guard in a way that left him quietly humbled. He glanced at Lily, whose face glowed as she admired her tiny steps in the new shoes. Something eased in his chest, a gentleness returning that he thought life had taken away. He nodded at Ava, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," he said again, this time with a depth that made the words feel sacred. Ava smiled, accepting the gratitude without making him feel small, letting him keep his dignity intact. The connection between the three of them settled into a warm, tender silence. But as Ava reached for her basket again, something pulled her attention back to Lily's worn plastic bag. The folded school notice poked out just enough for Ava to catch a glimpse of the red letters again. Something about it tugged at her curiosity, a gentle warning of struggles she did not yet understand. She stepped closer and glanced at the father, sensing that the situation might be heavier than she first assumed. Her heart tightened with the quiet certainty that this family story held more than missing shoes and wet socks. And without realizing it, she found herself drawn deeper into their world than she had expected. Ava reached toward the edge of the school notice, her fingers brushing the damp paper gently as she tried to read the bold red letters more clearly. The father noticed immediately, his expression tightening with a mix of worry and embarrassment. He shifted Lily slightly behind him, as though shielding both her and the truth the notice carried. Ava stepped back with a respectful nod, not wanting to overstep the fragile trust forming between them. But the father sighed, shoulders slumping as though weighed down by a secret he no longer had the strength to hide. His hand trembled slightly as he pulled the notice from the plastic bag. "It's from her school," he said quietly, voice cracking around the edges. He held out the paper as if it were something heavy, something he feared someone might judge him for. Ava accepted it gently, her eyes softening at the sight of the wrinkled, rain-soaked letter. The notice was short and blunt, printed in cold, official text that left no room for compassion. It listed mandatory items for the upcoming school term uniform pieces, supplies, appropriate footwear. At the bottom, a final line was underlined in red, a warning rather than a suggestion. Failure to comply may affect attendance. Ava felt her stomach tighten at the thought of a child missing school because of something so simple yet so devastating. She looked up at Lily, who clung to her father with a quiet fear she tried to hide behind her new shoes. The girl shifted slightly, her fingers playing nervously with the ends of her sleeves. She already missed 2 days last week, the father admitted, lowering his eyes to the floor. His voice held the kind of shame that came from doing everything possible and still falling short. I didn't have the money for the uniform sweater and the weather's been cold. I didn't want her getting sick. Ava exhaled slowly, her heart catching on the raw honesty of the moment. She could see the truth now. The shoes were only a small piece of a larger struggle, one stitched into the fabric of their daily lives. The father wasn't neglectful. He was drowning quietly, one requirement at a time. Lily stepped forward timidly, tugging on Ava's sleeve with a softness that made Ava's chest ache. "I don't want Daddy to get in trouble," she whispered, her voice heavy with worry no child should carry. She glanced up at him, then back at Ava, her new shoes tapping lightly in a nervous rhythm. "He won't," Ava said firmly, crouching again to meet Lily's eyes. She placed her hands gently on the girl's arms, grounding her with a steady warmth. "This isn't your fault or his. You both deserve better than being afraid of a simple school list." The father swallowed hard, trying to speak, but losing his voice to emotion that rose thick in his throat. Ava stood again, facing him with the quiet strength of someone who refused to let kindness end at a single gesture. The air between them shifted, warmer now, filled with a growing sense of shared purpose. "You're a good father," she said softly, offering him a truth he clearly hadn't heard in a long time. Her words hung in the space between them, sinking into the cracks where doubt had lived for years. The father blinked rapidly, caught off guard by a kindness he didn't know how to receive. "I'm trying," he whispered, the confession trembling in the air. He looked at Lily, then back at Ava, his eyes shimmering with gratitude and a lingering fear of needing too much. "I just want her to have a chance." Ava nodded, feeling a resolve form slowly, gently, but unmistakably in her chest. She couldn't fix everything, but she could do more than just walk away after buying a pair of shoes. She turned toward the aisle beside them, where rows of school clothes and supplies lined the shelves. "Let's get what she needs," Ava said, her voice steady with decision. "The sweater, the supplies, everything. She shouldn't miss another day." The father drew in a sharp breath, his hand rising instinctively as though trying to stop her, then lowering again in defeat. His eyes filled with conflict, pride battling against the undeniable relief of someone extending a hand at the exact moment he needed it most. "I don't know how to repay you," he murmured, a quiet battle raging behind his tired eyes. Ava shook her head gently, offering him a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to," she said. "Just let her go to school feeling confident and warm. That's enough." Lily looked up at both of them, her new shoes glinting under the store lights as she lifted her chin with newfound hope. And in that fragile moment, surrounded by shelves of everyday items and a kindness she never expected, the girl reached out and took Ava's hand. The father watched the gesture with a mixture of gratitude and awe, knowing something precious was unfolding right in front of him. He knew that this moment, had this stranger, would become part of their story for reasons he couldn't yet understand. Ava held Lily's hand gently as they walked toward the next aisle, the small girl moving with a lightness that hadn't been there minutes before. Her steps felt steadier now, her new shoes sending soft taps across the floor like tiny sparks of hope. The father followed behind them, each step hesitant, as though afraid the moment might vanish if he moved too quickly. They stopped before a rack of school sweaters, soft navy blue ones with small embroidered initials matching Lily's school emblem. Ava lifted one and held it against Lily's shoulders, smiling as the size fit perfectly. Lily touched the fabric with careful fingers, her eyes shining with quiet wonder. The father stepped closer, his voice trembling as he spoke. "She'd be warm in that," he murmured, unable to hide the mixture of relief and humility in his tone. He traced the sleeve lightly, almost reverently, as though the sweater represented far more than clothing. "She hasn't had a new one in, well, a long time." Ava nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. She placed the sweater gently in the basket, then turned toward the shelf of notebooks, pencils, and school supplies. Lily's face brightened as she reached for a pink notebook, her fingers brushing carefully over the cover as though selecting something precious. Ava let her pick the color she loved, wanting her to feel included in every part of this moment. The father stood silently beside them, hands clasped tightly as he watched his daughter move through the aisle. There was a softness in his expression, now a quiet easing of the tension he had carried for too long. Yet beneath that softness lingered a shadow of worry, as if he feared accepting too much kindness might someday cost him. Ava noticed, and she slowed her pace, giving him space to breathe. She didn't want him to feel overwhelmed or diminished by the help she offered. Instead, she wanted him to feel seen, understood, and valued in a world that often overlooked people like him. When they reached the checkout line, Lily clung to both adults, one hand wrapped around her father, the other around Ava. She looked up at them with a shy smile, the kind that carried gratitude too big for her small voice. Her new shoes squeaked softly each time she shifted, a gentle reminder of how far she had come in a single afternoon. The cashier scanned the items quietly, glancing at the trio with a soft expression. She didn't ask questions. She simply smiled at Lily and placed the items neatly into a bag. The total appeared on the screen, and before the father could react, Ava slid her card across the counter with calm certainty. The father inhaled sharply, panic flooding his expression as he reached for his wallet. "Please let me pay for some of it," he said, voice shaking with a need to contribute. His hand fumbled at the zipper, but Ava gently touched his wrist, stopping him without force. "This is not a debt," she said softly, her words warm and steady. "It's a moment. A moment where I could help, and I wanted to. That's all." He froze, her words settling into him like a warmth he didn't know how to accept. Slowly, his hand fell still, his eyes softening as he watched the cashier finish the transaction. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to feel relief without guilt dragging it down. Outside, the rain had gentled into a fine mist, the world washed clean under the pale afternoon light. Lily stepped out onto the sidewalk, lifting her little feet to admire her shoes with every other step. She twirled once, her laughter floating into the cool air like the sound of something healing. The father stood beside Ava, hands deep in his pockets, struggling to find the right words. Emotion tightened his throat, making it difficult to speak with the steady tone he wanted to offer. After a long, quiet moment, he finally turned to her. "You didn't just buy her shoes," he said softly. "You gave her a reason to smile again. And you gave me something, too." His voice wavered, and he looked briefly to the ground before lifting his gaze once more. "You reminded me the world still has good people." Ava felt her chest warm at his words, touched by the sincerity in them. She looked at Lily dancing in her new shoes, rain catching in the small curls of her hair as she held the school bag close. The sight was simple, but profoundly beautiful in a way that stirred Ava's heart. "She deserves this," Ava said, her voice comforting. "And so do you." He nodded slowly, letting the truth of her words settle. His shoulders, once tight with worry, finally began to loosen. He watched Lily with a softened gaze, seeing her joy as a gift he'd almost forgotten how to receive. Lily ran back toward them, her arms outstretched as she tugged both adults into a small, clumsy hug. Ava laughed softly, pulling the girl close, while the father knelt and wrapped his arms around his daughter with a tenderness carved deep from love. In that embrace, simple, warm, and genuine, the world seemed to pause. The rain quieted, the street dimmed, and for a brief, perfect moment, there was nothing but the quiet power of kindness, connecting three hearts that had begun the day as strangers. Ava stepped back slowly, not wanting to intrude on their closeness. But Lily reached for her hand again, unwilling to let the moment end. The father smiled shyly, gratitude shimmering like a soft light behind his tired eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, final thank you that held everything he couldn't say before. Ava squeezed Lily's hand gently and offered him a warm, steady nod. As they finally walked away, Lee skipping in her new shoes, her father carrying the school bag with renewed hope, Eva stood for a moment beneath the soft rain. She watched them disappear down the sidewalk, knowing she had stepped into a moment that would stay with all of them forever. It was a small act, a simple gesture, yet it carried the weight of something greater, a reminder that kindness, offered freely and without expectation, could change a day, and maybe even a life.